kids engaged.
Well, this raises another question for me and your candidacy. So again, I think that people are afraid to talk about race. They're afraid to talk about white supremacy culture. And yet right now, it is in our face with what's going on in the streets. There's a lot of pain, a lot of hurt out there. I love that the person you are brings to your leadership level of culture or your an awareness of your own culture that includes connectivity and healing, because there's very little disagreement in our world right now that that's not important and needed. However, when we get to the brass tacks, I know from the work that I do, that when we start talking about equity, walls go up for some people. And walls don't go up for some people because they don't want equity, but because they don't understand it and they're afraid of it. And they're afraid of what it might mean before they even know what it does mean. And I think there's a whole school of thought out there that equity is achieved by bringing everybody down to the lowest common denominator. That equity is, like, in other words, to be pro-inclusive means to, and I'll just be politically incorrect here, means to exclude white people. Well, how is that pro-inclusive? And so the truth is, as we open up a community and a playing field that is more accepting and embracing of multiple stories, including the stories of those who are afraid they'll all of a sudden be left out, what would you say to a family that in their head believes in equity, but out of their heart and fear actually fight the transformation that needs to actually take place? Because they'll be your constituents as well.
Yes, yes. I hope I get this quote right. I have it in my mind, and it's Nelson Mandela's quote. And it would answer that. And it's, there can be no contentment. There can be no contentment for anyone when millions of children don't receive the education that provides dignity and honor and allows them to live their fullest life. So to me, that means that we have work to do together.
Yeah.
And if and when we get to that point of equity, okay, that means improving the lives of those that have been harmed. The economic benefits, okay, for our society, making it a just world if we get to that, if and when we get to that. Mm-hmm. So my belief is that children, each and every child is provided a quality or excellent education.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And having said that, and that's the short of it, but then we can go down the road of inclusion. We can go down the road of policies. I think on the macro level, as a board member, that would be my job, and that's what I'm excited about, is having an equity lens and creating the policies along the lines of the strategic plan that President Mia Bonta has brought forth when she entered into the office, as well as the other board members. You know, looking at not just curriculum, where students see who they are in the curriculum, whether it be LGBTQ or African American or Pacific Islander, whatever. We need to bring that in, but also the practices from the top, from the leadership level, all the way to the classroom level, and even to parents. So these, we could talk about restorative practice. We can talk about, that and changing disciplinary systems, which a lot of schools are doing. The climate and the environment, that's a practice to be welcoming and embracing diversity, and those are conversations that have to be had. That's not coming from the board level, but we have that lens that's what we want to see and hear and feel when we walk into the schools, to every school. And, you can include hiring. We need to hire diverse staff. So policies on that. How do you do that? Okay. And then really be intentional about it. So from language discourse, we can go on and on and on, but bottom line is the policies that we that we enact will be very, rich in that inclusion and dismantle the policies that are not.
Yeah. I deeply, deeply appreciate this response because it unearths a bit of a tension that I experience in our in the construct of school systems, um, and that the rub that I sometimes experience is the idea that we want these amazing folks to be our Board of Ed representatives, and Board of Ed representatives actually have a very specific job, which is different than your job of working inside a district or inside a school. And we want people who have your experiences there. How do you see yourself approaching the fact that, again, there's some nuances, but if I were to totally oversimplify it, your job is going to be to supervise one employee and to make macro policy, right? And
Yes.
how do you see your vision, or, how will you be able to navigate in there to be the most effective for the community you represent?
You said it quite clear in terms of being clear on what my role is, and you said it, to supervise the superintendent whose job is for the day-to-day operations of the school and letting the board know, letting us know what's needed in order for him to get the job done. So to me, the policies that are aimed at our priorities, evaluating the daily operation of the superintendent and those goals that are set forth, and obviously managing the budget. And part of that is getting the revenue that the superintendent needs to do his job. So for me, now it's on the macro level. It's one, okay, I'm going to go back to relationships. Developing relationships with board are, because we have to work together. It's not politics. This is human, how do you call it, dynamics, okay? It's the group dynamics. We have to set these norms, of how do we make these decisions, and how do we, when we disagree, what's that discourse look like, and how do we come back to the table? So those things are really essential, is creating that space. And then also as a board, having really, I'm again going back to being big on community and, just being transparent. What are those platforms? This is a new learning, and this may be here for a while, might be here forever. How do we create platforms or venues or whatever you might call it, where it's accessible to our community? And I'm always mindful of, look at the BIPOC community. They may not have access. They may not have, they're working two jobs. So how do we get their voice included in this? So, so that's really important to me, that the people are able to express their desires and needs for their children. So relationships foster that. And then we're guided by the strategic plan. I always want to go back to vision, because you need a vision in either to get to the end. If you don't, right? If you don't have that, then you're kind of off track. You're going to derail, and arguments, things like that go on. So you have to, have that vision, and you have your benchmarks. The board has to have it, as well as the superintendent. That's just project management. It's a good way to function. So yeah, I just think that it starts with relationships and being clear on what our role is, and having good communications with the superintendent and labor, and staying the course of the strategic plan. And lastly, making sure we get input from the community, and that what they say is part of the process.
I really appreciate that. You've answered a few questions in that that I had written down. One of them, just to bring attention to the question, but I feel like you answered it, is you're so committed, and this notion of community building and community connection is so integral to your being. I was curious how that would mesh with your role of oversight. And what I hear you saying is that you would be inclusive for voices and all this, etc. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is also really important to highlight and note is that your experience becomes your mindset, that your experience and your commitment to equity is how you're going to approach your policies, your relationship building, etc. And so I just want to highlight those and appreciate those.